They declared me insane to steal my husband's inheritance. But they didn't know about the homeless man who saw it all. I still remember the quiet of that hospital room, the way the machine hummed like a faraway train as my husband's breath grew shallower. I had held his hand through so many storms, but nothing prepares you for the silence when the person you love most in the world takes their last breath. For 50 years, Patrick was my anchor, my sparring partner, my one true companion. He wasn't perfect. Lord knows he could be stubborn as a mule, but he was mine. And now the chair by my bed was empty, the Sunday mornings quiet, and the world suddenly too big for me. The days after the funeral blurred together. Friends sent casseroles, neighbors offered kind words, and yet the house felt hollow. His slippers were still under the bed, his razor still by the sink, his books lined up neatly in the study like he'd come back any minute to pull one down. I couldn't bring myself to move a thing. Even the smell of his aftershave lingered in the air, and I caught myself leaning into it, as though I could breathe him back into being. Grief has a strange way of settling into the body. My back ached, not from age alone but from the weight of missing him. My eyes felt heavy even when I slept. The mornings stretched long, and sometimes I caught myself reaching for a second coffee cup before remembering there was no one left to drink it. It wasn't long before the phone began to ring with business matters. The estate, they called it. I hated the word. Cold. Empty. As though all Patrick had worked for, his sweat, his long hours at the company, the home we built together, was reduced to lines on paper and signatures in black ink. Still, I knew it had to be faced. His lawyer had written weeks before the funeral, requesting my presence at the reading of the will and the handling of assets. Assets. Another word that tasted wrong in my mouth. What they meant was the life we built. Our home, his company shares, the little savings tucked away for the grandchildren. To them it was business. To me it was memory. The night before the trip, I sat alone at the kitchen table with Patrick's tie folded neatly in front of me. It was the only thing of his our daughter-in-law had handed me after he passed. Not a note, not even one of the journals he always kept. Just a silver tie clip in a small box. I ran my fingers over the metal and whispered to him, "You'd better stay with me tomorrow, Patrick. I don't trust those smiles around the table." I packed my black handbag with the papers they'd sent, my good scarf, and a small photograph of him in his younger days, smiling at the lake. I wanted his face near me, even in a courtroom-like office. When I finally zipped the bag shut, the house felt so still that I thought I'd lose my breath. I walked from room to room, whispering goodnight to each corner. Our bedroom, the garden he had loved, the study with its shelves of history. "Goodbye, my love," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to him, to the house, or to myself. The next morning I set off for the city. The bus ride was long, the landscape rolling past in shades of brown and green. I watched farms give way to suburbs. Suburbs give way to gray towers of glass and steel. My reflection in the bus window looked older than I remembered. Lines deeper, hair thinner, shoulders stooped from sorrow. I pulled my coat tighter, clutching my bag like a shield. The closer I drew to the city, the heavier my heart grew. I thought of Patrick's years at the company, how he used to come home smelling of ink and strong coffee. I thought of the evenings when he'd sit with ledgers spread out on the table, shaking his head at the numbers, muttering about responsibility. "We have to leave something behind, love," he'd say, his brow furrowed. "Something solid for the children." He never meant for that legacy to become a battlefield. At one point, the bus stopped at a small station, and I stepped out to stretch my legs. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food from the diner across the street. A young couple laughed loudly as they carried their bags, leaning into each other the way Patrick and I once did when we were young. For a moment, the sound made me ache with both longing and bitterness. Time moves forward for everyone else, while for me it stood still the day he died. I bought myself a coffee, black, though it tasted nothing like the cups Patrick used to make on Sunday mornings. He had a way of brewing it strong but smooth, a skill I never quite mastered. The warmth of the paper cup in my hand steadied me though, and I thought, "All right, old girl. You can do this." By the time the bus pulled into the city's terminal, my nerves were a tangled knot. I smoothed my skirt, adjusted my scarf, and tried to carry myself with the dignity Patrick always admired in me. But deep down, I was just a widow with a heavy heart, walking into a room full of strangers who would decide the fate of the life I had shared with my husband. As I stepped off the bus and onto the busy street, the city noise roared around me, horns, footsteps, voices calling. I clutched my bag and whispered once more, "Goodbye, my love. I'll carry you with me." And with that, I turned toward the tall building where my future and Patrick's legacy would be placed on the scales. The streets of the city pressed in on me as I walked toward the law office. Tall glass buildings leaned over my shoulders like watchmen, and the air buzzed with horns, voices, and hurried footsteps. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, their coats flapping behind them like sails. I, on the other hand, felt like a small boat caught in a current, swept along toward something I couldn't control. I clutched my handbag close and kept my eyes low, careful not to be jostled. The pavement was slick from a recent rain, and the smell of damp concrete clung to everything. I had almost reached the corner where I needed to turn when I saw him. At first, I thought he was just another soul the city had chewed up and spat out. He was sitting against the wall of a shuttered shop, wrapped in a dirty coat, his hair long and matted, his face unshaven. A paper cup sat by his side with only a few coins clinking in the bottom. But when his eyes lifted to mine, something familiar stirred in me. I slowed my step, tilting my head, searching through the fog of years. And then it struck me. Those eyes, warm and brown once, though now dulled by hardship, they belonged to Martin. Martin! I whispered almost to myself. His head jerked slightly, as though the name tugged on a thread deep inside. For a moment he seemed startled. Then recognition flickered. "Mrs. Whittaker?" he said, his voice hoarse but still carrying that old rhythm. I felt my heart pull tight. Martin had once worked in my husband's company. More than that, he had been well liked. He wasn't a manager or a man of status, but he had a gift that set him apart. Every morning, before the machines roared and the men bent their backs to work, Martin would brew coffee in the old tin pot in the break room. Patrick used to come home and tell me about it. "Martin makes coffee the way angels would," he'd laugh, wiping his brow. "Strong, rich, and with something extra you can't name. The men say it keeps them upright through the long hours." I remembered visiting the factory once for a holiday luncheon. Martin had pressed a cup into my hands with a shy smile, and I'd tasted it. He was right. It was coffee that seemed to put warmth back into your bones. I'd thanked him, and he had only nodded, eyes lowering as though embarrassed by the praise. But somewhere along the line Martin lost his way. Drink had gotten hold of him. I recalled Patrick coming home one evening troubled. "He's been turning up late," eyes bloodshot. The boys try to cover for him, but it's hard to hide a man who can't stand straight. A few months later, the company had to let him go. We tried to help. Patrick even slipped him some money once, but addiction has a grip stronger than any handout. Eventually, Martin faded from our lives like smoke from a candle. And now, here he was again, ragged, sitting on the street like a ghost who'd waited for me all these years. "Oh, Martin," I said softly, crouching down beside him despite the damp pavement. "What's happened to you?" He gave a small laugh, bitter and thin. "Same thing that happens to many, ma'am. One bottle too many, one chance too few." He looked at me, his eyes glinting with something more. "But you've got your husband's eyes still on you. I can see it. He believed in you, Mrs. Whittaker." The words caught me off guard and I felt my throat tighten. I placed a trembling hand on his arm. I'm on my way to settle Patrick's affairs, I told him. The lawyers want me at the office. At that, his expression shifted. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as though the very walls might be listening. Don't go. I blinked. What do you mean, don't go? His eyes darted around and he whispered fiercely. They're waiting for you. Your son's wife. She's got the lawyers in her pocket. They'll say you're not right in the head, that you're too old to handle the inheritance. They'll push papers in front of you, and before you know it, everything will be in your son's name. The city noise seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of my heart. I shook my head slowly, struggling to take it in. How could you possibly know that? Martin's face hardened, the years of hardship carving shadows into his cheeks. Because she told me, Mrs. Whitaker. She sat in that cafe on 5th Street with her fancy handbag and her sharp tongue. She thought I was nobody, just another beggar. But I heard her. She said you were in the way. Said money belongs in the hands of the younger generation. She laughed about it, laughed. I stared at him, the air suddenly too thin. My daughter-in-law had always been polite on the surface, smiling with lips pressed tight. But beneath it I had sensed a steel edge. Still, to imagine her plotting such cruelty, it made my stomach twist. Martin gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Please, don't go in there. They'll strip you of everything, even your dignity. I couldn't help myself years ago, but maybe I can help you now. For a long moment I stayed crouched on that damp sidewalk, his words settling heavy in my chest. Part of me wanted to believe he was mistaken, that grief had made me paranoid. But another part, the part that remembered the calculating look in my daughter-in-law's eyes, could not dismiss it. I finally drew a deep breath and stood, straightening my coat. Martin, thank you, I said, though my voice wavered. I don't know what's ahead, but I must go. I owe it to Patrick to see it through. His face fell, but he nodded, as if he had expected my stubbornness. Then go with your eyes open, he warned. Trust no one in that room. I pressed a few bills into his cup, though I knew money wasn't what he wanted. What he had given me was far more precious. A warning. As I walked away, the weight of his words followed me step after step, like a shadow I could not shake. The law office loomed just blocks away, its glass doors shining in the afternoon light. And though my feet carried me forward, my heart whispered with dread. What if Martin was right? I walked on, but Martin's words clung to me like burrs in wool. Each step toward the law office felt heavier than the last. His warning replayed in my head. They'll call you unfit. They'll take it all. For a moment I thought about turning back, finding the next bus out of the city, and leaving all of this behind. Let them keep their papers, their signatures, their polished smiles. What good was money after all compared to peace? But then I thought of Patrick. He had worked too hard, too long to see everything he built snatched away. He trusted me to protect what remained, not only for myself but for our son and grandchildren. I couldn't abandon that duty, no matter how frightened I was. I stopped at the edge of a small park, where benches lined the path and pigeons strutted with the confidence of men in suits. The air smelled faintly of roasted peanuts from a street cart. I sat on the cold wood of the bench, my handbag resting on my knees, and let the city swirl around me while I tried to steady my heart. A voice startled me. You shouldn't go, Mrs. Whitaker. I looked up and there was Martin again. He had followed me, standing awkwardly a few feet away, as though unsure if he belonged in daylight among businessmen and mothers with strollers. I told you already, I said softly, though not unkindly. I must. He shook his head hard, his hair falling into his eyes. You don't understand. I heard her, your son's wife. She's clever, sharper than people think. She said she'd found a way to make you look broken, like your memory is failing, like you're confused. The words made my skin prickle. My memory had its lapses, as any 74-year-old's would. I forgot where I put my glasses sometimes, or whether I'd salted the soup. But that didn't mean I was unfit. And yet, in the hands of schemers, even the smallest forgetfulness could be twisted into evidence. She said the lawyers would take care of it, Martin continued, his voice dropping low. That they'd bring in papers from a doctor, someone on their side. They'll make you sign, or worse, claim you don't understand what you're signing. And once it's done. You'll have nothing. I gripped the handle of my bag tighter, my knuckles white. Why are you telling me this, Martin? After all these years? For the first time, his gaze softened, and I saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the one who poured coffee with steady hands and a quiet pride. Because your husband was good to me, he said simply, even when I'd fallen too far. He was the only man who looked me in the eye when everyone else turned away. I couldn't save myself then, but maybe I can save you now. His words struck deep. I remembered Patrick's compassion, his way of helping quietly, never boasting. Yes, he would have offered a kind word, $1, maybe more, even when Martin was lost to drink. And now that small kindness echoed back in this warning. Still doubt not at me. Martin, I said carefully, you've been through much. How can I be sure this isn't just a story? He met my eyes squarely. Because I have nothing to gain. Look at me. What could I possibly want from you? I just don't want to see you thrown away like I was. I swallowed hard, torn between fear and duty. And you're certain my daughter-in-law was behind it? His jaw tightened. As certain as I am sitting here. She spoke with her friend, loud enough that the whole cafe could have heard if they cared to listen. She laughed when she said it. That's what burned me. Laughed like it was a game. The pigeons fluttered noisily around our feet, as if stirred by the weight of his words. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. Patrick had always told me, trust your gut, love. It knows the truth before your head does. And my gut was churning now. Finally, I opened my eyes and stood. Thank you, Martin. Truly. But I cannot turn away. If what you say is true, then facing it is the only way to prove them wrong. His shoulders slumped, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small crumpled paper. If you need me, I stay under the bridge near the river. Everyone knows me there. Just ask for Martin. I took the slip, pressing it into my bag as though it were a lifeline. I pray I won't need to, but thank you. He nodded once, eyes glistening in the pale sunlight. May God watch over you, Mrs. Whitaker. I turned back toward the towering building at the end of the block. Its windows gleamed coldly, reflecting a sky that had grown gray. Each step forward felt like walking into a storm, but I kept Patrick's memory steady in my chest, like a lantern held against the wind. At the door of the law office I paused, smoothing my scarf and squaring my shoulders. Martin's warning echoed in my mind. They'll say you're unfit. Don't go. But I was already here. And whether I was walking into truth or betrayal, I would not turn back. With one last deep breath, I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The lobby of the law office was a world apart from the street outside. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and money, the kind of clean that comes from someone else scrubbing the floor. The floor was tiled in black and white squares, and the receptionist behind the desk looked like she had been born in a gray suit. Her eyes flicked up when I walked in, then back down at her papers as if she could already tell I didn't belong. I gave my name and she nodded curtly. They're waiting for you, Mrs. Whitaker. 4th floor. Conference room B. The elevator creaked as it climbed, each ding sounding like a countdown to something I didn't want to face. When the doors opened, a long hallway stretched before me, lined with doors, each with brass nameplates that gleamed in the fluorescent light. I felt like I was walking through a school for grown-ups where the lessons were harsher and the tests crueler. At the end of the hall, the door stood open and voices spilled out. Smooth, practiced voices punctuated by polite laughter. My heart stuttered. For a moment, I almost turned and ran back to the elevator. But I thought of Patrick and of Martin's warning, and I straightened my scarf. If they wanted to call me weak, they'd have to look me in the eye while they did it. The conference room was wide, all glass windows and a long mahogany table that shone like a mirror. Around it sat men in suits, their ties knotted with precision, and women in stiff blazers who looked like they'd never once spilled soup on themselves. At the head of the table was Mr. Callahan, my husband's longtime attorney, or so I thought. His hair had gone grayer since I last saw him, but his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating. And there she was, my daughter-in-law Margaret, sitting straight-backed in a navy dress, her pearl earrings catching the light. She gave me a smile, but it wasn't the kind you give family. It was the kind you give a stranger you'd rather not see. My son David sat beside her. He looked tired, almost startled when I entered, as though he hadn't expected me to come at all. "Mother," he said, rising quickly, pulling out a chair for me. That small gesture made my throat ache with a sudden rush of love and sadness. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw hesitation, confusion. He was adrift in waters he didn't control. "Mrs. Whitaker," Mr. Callahan said smoothly, his voice warm but without warmth, "thank you for joining us. Please sit. We have a few matters to discuss concerning your husband's estate." I sat carefully, placing my handbag on the table in front of me like a shield. The surface reflected my face back at me. Lined, pale, older than I felt inside. The room quieted, and the air grew heavy with expectation. Papers shuffled, pens clicked. It felt staged, rehearsed, as though every smile and every word had been practiced in advance. My skin prickled. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her manicured hands folded neatly. "We're all here to help you through this, Mother Whitaker," she said sweetly, her tone smooth as cream but with something sharp underneath. "This is never easy, but we want to make sure everything is done properly." Something in her voice reminded me of the way a nurse once spoke to me when I was giving birth to David, telling me to breathe as though I hadn't already been breathing for 20 years. It was the tone of someone who wanted you calm, compliant. I looked around the table. Every eye seemed to be on me, studying, weighing. My son shifted uncomfortably, tapping a pen against the table before Margaret gently laid her hand over his to still it. That small act of control did not go unnoticed. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat. "Your husband's will is straightforward. There are his company shares, the savings accounts, and of course the house. But before we proceed with distribution, there are some preliminary matters to confirm." I felt a chill run through me. Martin's warning echoed in my ears. "They'll say you're unfit." "Preliminary matters?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Yes," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Just routine, of course. At your age, it is customary for us to verify capacity, your ability to make informed decisions about legal and financial matters. Nothing to worry about. Purely a formality." A formality. The word rang false. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were papers filled with medical jargon, reports stamped with a doctor's seal. My eyes caught on words like decline, early signs, and recommendation of guardianship. My heart thudded painfully. I looked up sharply at Mr. Callahan, then at Margaret, whose lips curved in the faintest of smiles. My son glanced at the papers but quickly looked away, confusion clouding his face. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thick. My chest ached with the weight of realization. This was no formality. This was the trap Martin had warned me of. But I couldn't show fear. Not yet. I folded my hands on the table and forced my voice to be calm. "I see," I said softly. The lawyers shuffled more papers, their movements smooth, rehearsed. Margaret leaned closer to my son, whispering something I couldn't hear. He nodded, his brow furrowed. I sat there, surrounded by polished wood and polished lies, my heart pounding but my face still. Patrick's voice echoed in my mind. Stand steady, love. Don't let them see you bend. And so I sat, waiting for the moment the storm would break, knowing in my bones that nothing about this gathering was ordinary. The folder sat before me like a stone dropped into water, rippling out until every corner of the room seemed to vibrate with its weight. My fingers traced the edge of the paper, but I did not turn another page. I didn't need to. I knew enough. Mr. Callahan leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Mrs. Whitaker, these are medical evaluations from a respected physician. They suggest that at this stage of your life, it may be best to appoint a trusted family member to oversee financial and legal matters on your behalf, just to relieve you of the burden. The burden, as if living, remembering, and loving were all too heavy for me now. I met his eyes, and for the first time I saw something there. Not concern, not care, but calculation. Margaret spoke next, her voice smooth as cream. Mother, you've been through so much since Father passed. We only want what's best for you. It's common at your age. Nothing to be ashamed of. Her words landed sharp, even wrapped in sweetness. Nothing to be ashamed of, she said, as though shame was already mine to carry. I turned to my son. His eyes darted away from mine to the papers, then back down to the table. David, I whispered. His name came out softer than I meant, a plea more than a question. He shifted in his chair. Mom, maybe it would be easier this way. Less stress on you. We'll take care of everything. The words cut deeper than any knife. He thought he was being kind, but I heard the truth in it. They had convinced him. He saw me not as the mother who raised him, not as the wife who had stood beside his father for half a century, but as an old woman crumbling, incapable. The lawyer nearest to me slid a pen across the table. Its silver gleam reflected the overhead light, almost blinding. All you need to do, Mrs. Whitaker, is sign here. This document formally appoints your son as guardian of the estate. Once it's done, all responsibilities will be in his hands. My hand trembled as it hovered over the pen. I thought of Martin, his ragged face warning me on the street. They'll strip you of everything, even your dignity. I thought of Patrick, who used to say, "You're sharper than any of them, love. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And I thought of the home we built together, the garden we planted, the life we carved out of long years. I wanted to shout, to pound my fist on the table, to demand how they dared. But the room was thick with expectation, with eyes waiting for me to stumble. My son sat beside his wife, his hand twitching, his face pale as if he too was unsure whether this was right. I reached for the pen, not because I believed them, but because I knew the weight of refusing in that moment. My voice would have been drowned in their polished speeches, their rehearsed concern. Alone I had no chance. Not yet. So I signed. My name shaky but clear across a line that felt like a chain tightening. The sound of the pen scratching on paper echoed like a gavel in my ears. When it was done, the lawyer gathered the papers swiftly, sealing them in a folder as though locking away the last of my independence. There, Mr. Callahan said, smiling thinly. Now everything is in order. Your son will oversee the estate. You may rest easy knowing it's all taken care of. Rest easy. I sat back in my chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I looked at David. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed thin. He looked surprised, as though he hadn't expected it to go so far, so quickly. Margaret leaned over and touched his arm, her smile calm and satisfied. "It's for the best, darling," she murmured. He nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. As the lawyers began to rise, gathering their pens and folders, I sat frozen in my chair. The room felt colder, emptier, though it was still filled with people. I thought of my garden at home, of the roses Patrick planted for me on our 25th anniversary. I thought of how he used to laugh when I pruned them too close, telling me they'd grow back stronger. But what had just been cut from me I feared would never grow back. Declared incompetent. That was what I had just become in their eyes. Not because I had failed, but because it suited them to call me so. And as I stood, smoothing my scarf and holding my handbag close, I whispered silently to myself, "This is not the end. Not yet." The meeting dissolved like sugar in hot tea, quiet, efficient, and leaving only a bitter taste behind. The lawyers snapped their folders shut, their polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. They spoke in low, satisfied tones as though they had just completed a fine piece of work. My son sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the table, while Margaret's pearl earrings swung lightly as she moved to gather her coat. I rose slowly, my body stiff from sitting so long, and clutched my handbag to my chest. My legs wobbled, but I willed them steady. Pride was the only shield I had left in that room. As the others drifted toward the door, Margaret lingered behind me. Her perfume, a sharp, expensive scent, wrapped around me like smoke. She leaned in close, so near I could feel the warmth of her breath against my ear. "Well," she whispered, her voice smooth but laced with steel, "you're old. You don't need this money." The words slid into me like a knife, not shouted, not written in legal papers, but whispered in the language of cruelty only women sometimes know how to wield. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment I thought I might crumble right there, collapse under the weight of humiliation. But I didn't. I stood still, eyes forward, though my heart thundered in my ribs. Her whisper wasn't meant to inform me. It was meant to break me, to let me know the truth behind her smile, the truth that the polite room had been designed to hide. They never intended for me to keep anything. I turned my head just slightly, enough to catch her eyes. Her smile lingered, small and smug. For the first time I saw her clearly, not as my son's wife, not as the mother of my grandchildren, but as a stranger who had carved her way into my family with ambition as sharp as glass. My son came to my side then, clearing his throat. "Mother," he said softly, "shall I walk you out?" I looked at him, and for a fleeting second I saw the boy he once was, the boy who used to run to me with skinned knees, the boy who fell asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. His face now was older, lined with worry, but I could still see him in there. "Yes," I said simply. My voice was steady, though inside I was trembling. The elevator ride down was quiet. My son stood beside me, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He didn't meet my eyes. I wanted to ask him if he'd heard her, if he understood what kind of woman sat beside him at that long table. But the words stuck in my throat. When the elevator doors opened, the cold city air rushed in. I stepped outside, clutching my coat tighter. My son hesitated, then reached for my arm, but I pulled away gently. "I can manage," I told him. He nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the noise of traffic swirling around us. He shifted from one foot to the other, finally muttering, "It'll be easier this way, Mom. You'll see." I looked at him, at the lines of his face, at the way he avoided my gaze. Easier for whom? I wanted to ask, but I held my tongue. I simply patted his arm and said, "Take care of yourself." And then I walked away, leaving him standing there, caught between guilt and loyalty he no longer seemed to understand. The city streets blurred as I moved. People brushed past me, their laughter and chatter loud in my ears. I felt like a ghost among them, my footsteps carrying me nowhere. Margaret's words replayed again and again in my head. "You're old. You don't need this money." It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the certainty in her voice, the casual cruelty. To her, my life had already been measured, weighed, and found wanting. To her, my years of work, my sacrifices, my very identity had boiled down to one thing. I was an obstacle. By the time I reached the bus depot, my knees ached, and my throat burned with unspoken grief. I sank onto a bench and stared at the tiled floor until the numbers blurred. For the first time since Patrick's death, I felt truly alone. Not just in my house, not just in my bed, but in the world itself. Even my own son had stood by while they stripped me of my voice. Yet beneath the sorrow something else stirred. A small, steady flame of defiance. If Margaret thought she had silenced me with her cruel whisper, she was mistaken. The whisper had done the opposite. It had opened my eyes. Something wasn't right. Something deeper was at play, and I would not rest until I uncovered it. I pressed my hand against my handbag, feeling the folded slip of paper Martin had given me with his name and his refuge. Perhaps it was time to find him again. Perhaps his warning wasn't just ramblings after all. As the bus rumbled into the station, I stood and stepped forward, my resolve building with each movement. I had been declared incompetent on paper, dismissed with a whisper, but inside I was sharper than ever. And I knew now that this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days passed before I found the strength to seek Martin again. Those days stretched long, heavy with silence. At home, I moved from chair to chair as though the furniture itself had grown unfamiliar. My house, once my haven, felt like a stage stripped bare after the play had ended. Props left behind, but the story gone. I brewed coffee in the old percolator Patrick loved, but even its familiar blurp-blurp sound offered little comfort. Each sip was bitter. Not from the beans but from the memory of what had been taken. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. His cardigan still draped over the back of a chair, his pipe resting untouched on the shelf. And now, layered over those memories, came the cruel whisper. "You're old. You don't need this money." I replayed that whisper in my mind until it became something else. A warning not of weakness but of a deeper deceit. Margaret's words had been too bold, too careless. She wasn't merely relieved of my burden, she was gloating. And gloating always leaves a trail. So on the second morning I tied my scarf under my chin, slipped the scrap of paper with Martin's name into my coat pocket, and walked toward the river. The city was louder than usual, or perhaps I simply noticed it more. Car horns blared, vendors shouted about their wares, and children laughed as they chased each other down sidewalks cracked with age. It all felt far away, as though I were moving through a different world, one that no longer had room for me. The bridge came into view, its steel ribs arching over the gray water below. Beneath it stretched a forgotten corner of the city where those with nowhere else to go gathered. Old blankets piled on pallets, shopping carts filled with scraps of lives left behind. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and something sour clung to the air. I hesitated at the edge, clutching my handbag. A part of me felt foolish. What was I doing? An old woman, creeping around under bridges looking for scraps of truth from a man the world had written off long ago. But another part of me knew. Sometimes it's the discarded who see the clearest. "Martin," I called softly, stepping carefully over the uneven ground. A cough answered me. From the shadows he emerged, wrapped in the same ragged coat, his face half hidden by a tangle of hair. He looked surprised to see me. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, straightening as best he could. "Didn't think you'd come back." "I had to," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You were right. Everything you warned me about, it happened. They declared me incompetent. Signed it all over to David." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, the old pride of the factory worker returned to his expression. "I told you," he muttered. "I told you they'd strip it from you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "How did you know? You said you overheard something. I need the truth now, Martin. Not half, not guesses, the truth." He shifted uneasily, glancing toward the others huddled nearby. Then he motioned for me to follow him farther under the bridge, away from listening ears. We settled onto a broken piece of concrete, the river's murmur filling the silence. "I saw her," he began, his eyes narrowing. "Your daughter-in-law. At a cafe downtown. She came in with a woman I didn't know, probably one of those lawyers. They didn't see me. I was sitting near the corner, nursing a cup someone bought me. She thought I was invisible. His voice roughened with anger. She bragged, Mrs. Whitaker. Said you were fragile, said you'd believe whatever story they fed you. She wanted everything, your money, your house, even down to the furniture. Said she'd make sure you couldn't fight. But the lawyers told her to slow down. Said if she took it all, people would start asking questions. So she settled for just the estate for now. I felt the air leave my chest. To hear it out loud confirmed made my knees weak. Patrick had always warned me that Margaret had ambition sharper than kindness, but I never thought she would go this far. Why didn't you stop me that day? I asked softly, though I already knew the answer. I tried, he said, his voice breaking. Told you not to go. But I could see it in your eyes you had to. And maybe it's better this way. 'Cause now you know. You've seen their hand. And you're still standing. I looked at him, this man who had once brewed the best coffee in the factory and now lived beneath a bridge, discarded but not broken. He had given me the one thing no lawyer in that office would, the truth. Martin, I said, reaching out to touch his weathered hand, you've done more for me than you know. But this isn't over. Not yet. For the first time he smiled faintly. Then fight, Mrs. Whitaker. Fight for what's yours. For what he left you. I rose slowly, pulling my coat tighter against the chill. The city above bustled on, unaware of the battle forming below its bridges. As I walked back toward the light, my heart was no longer heavy with grief alone. It burned now with something sharper, anger, and the first stirrings of resolve. They thought they had silenced me, but they were wrong. I walked home from the bridge with Martin's words echoing in my ears, each one striking harder than the last. She bragged. She wanted it all. Even your house. The cruelty of it churned in my chest until it was no longer grief but a flame I could not put out. For 2 days I had sat quietly in my house, folded in on myself like a paper left in the rain. But now anger straightened my back. Anger gave me breath. I was no helpless old woman. I had raised a son, buried a husband, and kept a home through lean years and good ones. And I would not let lies undo all of that. The morning after meeting Martin, I dressed with purpose. I pulled on my navy suit, the one I wore to church on Easter, and pinned my brooch over my heart. I brushed my hair smooth and dabbed powder on my cheeks. If I was to face them, I would not go looking like someone ready to be tucked away. At the law office, the secretary blinked when she saw me. Perhaps she thought I would vanish after signing their papers, like a shadow that fades once the sun sets. I need to speak to Mr. Callahan, I said firmly. My voice, to my own surprise, did not waver. He appeared minutes later, smoothing his tie as though even his clothes were practiced lies. Mrs. Whitaker, he said with false warmth, everything was handled already. You needn't trouble yourself. But I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a hiss. I know what you did. I know my daughter-in-law was in a cafe, laughing about how you declare me incompetent. I know she wanted the house too, but you told her it would draw suspicion. I have a witness. For a moment his face faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Then he recovered, his lips pressing into a thin smile. Mrs. Whitaker, you must be mistaken. Mistaken, I said, my voice rising. You may fool my son, but you will not fool me. I have nothing left to lose, and that makes me far more dangerous than you realize. The secretary's head popped up at the sound, eyes wide. Callahan leaned in, whispering fiercely, Lower your voice or you'll only prove our point. That was when I knew they were afraid of me. Not of my frailty, but of my strength. I left that office with fire in my chest. That night, I telephoned an old neighbor, Clara, who had once worked as a paralegal before her retirement. She listened carefully, and when I finished, she said, You need new counsel. Honest counsel. And you need evidence. If what you say is true, it can be proven. Evidence? I asked. Yes, she replied. Witnesses, documents, recordings. You said he overheard her? Then he can testify. And if she truly bragged in public, there may be cameras in that cafe. Many places record sound now. The thought of it made my knees weak. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof that would cut through their polished lies. 2 days later, I returned to the bridge. Martin was there, warming his hands over a small fire in a tin barrel. He looked up startled when I approached. Back again? He asked. I need you, I told him simply. I need you to tell the truth. To stand before others and say what you heard. Will you do that for me? His eyes widened. Me? In a courtroom? Yes, I said, laying a hand on his arm. You told me once that my husband treated you with kindness when no one else would. Help me honor that kindness. Help me fight back. For a long moment, he stared at the fire, the flames flickering in his tired eyes. Then he nodded. I'll do it. For him. For you. I felt my throat tighten with gratitude. That's not all, I said. The cafe, you said she spoke there. We'll need to see if they have recordings. Cameras. Anything. His mouth curved into the faintest smile. They do. I've been shooed out of there often enough to know. Small black cameras tucked in corners. My heart quickened. Proof. At last, a thread I could pull. When I returned home that evening, I sank into Patrick's chair, weary but lighter than I had felt in weeks. For the first time since his passing, I felt him near, not only in memory but in spirit, urging me forward. They thought you were weak, I whispered into the stillness. But they forgot you taught me better. You believed in me, Patrick. And I won't let you down. That night I slept with peace in my chest. Not because the battle was over, but because I finally knew I had the strength to fight it. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where too many secrets have been pressed into files. As I walked through its tall doors, I clutched my handbag the way a soldier might clutch a shield. My knees trembled, but my spirit did not. Patrick always said, courage isn't the absence of fear, love. It's doing the right thing even when your knees shake. My knees shook plenty that morning, but my back was straight. I had found new lawyers, honest men and women recommended by Clara, my neighbor. They were not the kind who smiled thinly while plotting behind closed doors. They looked me in the eye, called me Mrs. Whitaker with respect, and assured me that truth still had power in this world. Martin sat on a bench in the hallway when I arrived, cleaned up as best as he could manage. His coat was still frayed, but his face was freshly shaved, his hair combed back. When he saw me, he gave a nervous smile, almost boyish. Ready? I asked softly. As I'll ever be, he muttered, though his hands twisted in his lap. The bailiff called us in, and the courtroom filled my vision. A solemn chamber of dark wood, tall windows, and benches polished by decades of weary bodies. My son sat on one side, Margaret beside him in a neat suit, her pearl earrings gleaming under the lights. She did not look at me, but her lips pressed together in a small, tight line. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, presided with a gavel in hand. This court is now in session, she said firmly. The case unfolded slowly, like the turning of a heavy wheel. First, my lawyers presented the documents that had stripped me of my inheritance. They pointed out irregularities, the suspicious timing of medical evaluations, the lack of a truly independent doctor. They argued that I had been coerced into signing away my rights. Then came the heart of it, the witnesses. Martin stepped forward, shoulders hunched but voice steady. He told the court how he had overheard Margaret in the cafe, laughing with her companion about plans to have me declared unfit. His words rang out clear, his rough voice carrying more truth than all the polished lies spoken in that law office. She said the old woman would believe anything, Martin testified, his eyes flashing. She wanted it all, even the house. But the lawyers told her it would look too suspicious. Margaret's lawyer rose sharply. And you expect this court to believe the word of a vagrant? The judge's gavel struck the bench. This court will hear all testimony without insult. Martin looked at me then, and I nodded encouragement. He lifted his chin. I may live under a bridge, Your Honor, but I know what I heard. And I know what's right. Then came the proof no one could dispute, the cafe's security recordings. My lawyers had subpoenaed them, and when the video played, the courtroom fell silent. There she was, Margaret, sitting in that cafe with a sleek-haired woman. Her voice carried clearly across the speakers. The old woman won't know what's happening until it's too late. I want the money, the house, everything. But Callahan says we should take it slow. Just the estate for now. The words crackled through the courtroom like thunder. My son turned, staring at her in shock. Margaret? He whispered, his voice breaking. She shifted in her seat, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But she did not speak. The judge leaned forward. The evidence is clear. Mrs. Whitaker was unjustly declared incompetent through fraudulent means. The court hereby restores her rights and nullifies the transfer of her estate. Further investigation into collusion between attorneys will proceed. The gavel struck once more, sharp and final. I felt the weight lift from my chest as though a stone had been rolled away. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Not here, not in front of them. I stood tall, clutching my handbag, while Margaret stared down at the table, her carefully built mask shattered. David approached me hesitantly after the session, his face pale. Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I looked at him long and hard, then touched his cheek gently. I believe you, I said softly. But believing doesn't erase the hurt. We'll need time, son. Time to find our way back. He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight, Martin was waiting. He grinned, toothy and unpolished, but warmer than any lawyer's smile. You did it, he said. No, I replied, squeezing his hand. We did it. And for the first time since Patrick's passing, I felt the faint stirrings of peace, carried on the cool autumn air. 6 months have passed since the courthouse doors closed behind me, and life has found its rhythm again, gentler, steadier. The garden Patrick planted blooms as it always has, roses climbing the trellis in stubborn beauty. I tend them each morning, shears in hand, whispering to him as I clip away the dead blossoms. My son visits more often now. At first, our conversations were stiff, weighed down by guilt and silence. But little by little we've stitched together the fabric of our bond. Last week, he fixed the squeaky hinge on my back door without being asked, just like his father would have done. It was a small act, but to me it was proof love can be mended, even after betrayal. I've begun speaking at the community center, sharing my story with other widows and retirees. Too many of them nod knowingly, whispering of schemes and signatures they didn't understand until it was too late. If my experience can keep even one of them from being tricked, then it's worth telling. At night, when the house is quiet, I sit with Patrick's old tie draped across my lap. I think of how he trusted me always to be strong. Though others tried to convince the world I was weak, his faith is what carried me through. I am older now, yes, but I am not done. I still have roses to tend, stories to tell, and a life worth guarding. And that, my love, is enough. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.